Late evening settled over Charleston's jail like a heavy blanket. The little slave girl knelt on cold stone, scrubbing the corridor floor with a rag that had long since lost its color. Her hands moved in circles, steady and quiet, while lamplight from the guard station threw shadows that stretched and bent along the walls. The jailer made his rounds with 2 guards following. His boots hit stone, in a rhythm she'd learned to recognize: 3 steps, pause, then the jangle of keys at his belt. He counted under his breath, checking every lock, tugging every bolt, making sure his ledger stayed balanced and nothing went missing on his watch. She kept her head down and her breathing even, scrubbing, listening, learning. When he reached the corridor gate, he paused, always the same pause, then turned the key with a click that echoed down the hall. The clock on the far wall showed 10:30. The girl's eyes flicked to it, just for a second, then back to the floor. Routine dread had been her companion for months, but tonight something shifted. She wasn't just enduring the rounds, she was watching, memorizing. The timing was repeatable. The pattern was learnable. The last key turned, footsteps faded. The outer door slammed shut. The clock hand settled toward 11, and the girl let out a breath she'd been holding. In the cells nearby, prisoners shifted on thin pallets. An old stable hand pressed his face to the bars, his eyes tired but watchful. He'd worked with horses for 40 years and knew when something was about to change. The girl began to hum. It was soft, barely louder than breathing a lullaby the preacher sang on Sundays, steady, slow, the kind of sound that marked time without drawing attention. The stable hand's breathing slowed to match it, then another prisoner's, then another's. Down the row, men who'd been restless settled. The dogs in the yard outside stopped pacing and lay down, their huffing evening out into something like peace. Fear eased into shared calm. The girl kept humming, kept the tempo precise, and the hymn held steady as the minute hand crept forward on the clock. The stable hand closed his eyes, his shoulders dropped. For the first time in weeks, his jaw unclenched. At 11:07 p.m., the first lock clicked, then the second, then the third. Down the corridor, every cell lock opened in sequence, smooth, deliberate, like someone was turning keys that weren't there. The girl stopped humming, stopped scrubbing. She sat perfectly still, listening to the sound of iron releasing iron, and her heart hammered so loud she thought everyone could hear it. But no guards came running, no boots on stone, no shouts of alarm. Just the quiet click, click, click of locks opening one after another. When the last one finished, silence settled heavy as snow. The stable hand stared at his open cell door. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared like he was seeing something impossible made real, all without celebration. The girl listened, still as stone, while iron rested open and the song faded from the air. She looked at the clock. 11:07 p.m. exactly. Dawn came cold, then gray. The guards arrived for morning count and found every cell door standing open. The jailer's shout echoed through the building. What in God's name? He ran down the corridor, checking locks, testing mechanisms, his face going from red to pale to read again. The guards scrambled after him, boots clattering, voices rising in panic. The prisoners were still in their cells. No one had run, no one had tried to escape. They'd simply sat through the night with open doors, waiting to see what morning would bring. The overseer arrived within the hour, his face sharp with suspicion. He demanded answers. The jailer had none. 11-0-7, one guard said, checking the notes. Every lock, same minute. Conspiracy, the overseer said flatly. Someone's working from inside, someone's got keys or tools or it's a miracle, the stable hand said quietly from his cell. The overseer's eyes went hard. There are no miracles in a jail. Only schemes. Public fear raised the danger. What had been wonder in the dark became a hunt in the daylight. The jailer lifted an open shackle from the floor and held it high. Someone will answer for this, he said. The girl stood in the corner with her bucket and rag, eyes down, face empty. Her heart was still racing, but her hands stayed steady. 2 days later, she was sent to the office to clean while the owner's agent reviewed accounts. He was a nervous man with ink-stained fingers, always muttering about debts and creditors who never seemed satisfied. The girl moved quiet as air, wiping the desk edges and sweeping dust from the corners. The ledger lay open, its pages covered in tight columns of numbers and names. As she worked, her eyes caught something. A line doubled 2 entries for the same transaction, recorded as if they were separate. And beside it, on a pass waiting to be filed, a wax seal that was the wrong color. She'd seen courthouse seals before. Bright red, clean and official. This one was darker, almost brown. Like rust or old blood, suspicion became certainty. Someone was forging documents, making fraud look legal, doubling debts to justify sales that shouldn't happen. The ledger page curled at the corner, as if asking to be turned, as if it had more secrets to tell if anyone dared look. The girl finished wiping the desk and picked up her bucket. She left the office without a word, but the image of that wrong-colored wax burned in her mind. That evening, she was sent to the church basement with a load of laundry. The preacher was there, stacking quilts and sorting trunks for the poor. He hummed as he worked, the same hymn she'd used in the jail corridor, but with different verses that sounded like directions. When you reach the fork, turn toward the oak. Don't cross. When the pole is low. Double quotes. The girl folded a quilt and felt something in the binding. A ridge. Stitches laid over stitches in a pattern that wasn't decoration. She looked closer. Letters. Words sewn into cloth where no one would think to search. The preacher glanced at her and nodded. Just a small dip of his chin that said, "You see it, goat." Recognition flooded through her. She wasn't just a girl scrubbing floors. She was part of something larger, a mat, a network, a plan built in hymns and stitches and patience. Lantern light swung as the preacher moved, and the shadows sharpened the stitches into readable letters. Left, straight, right, stop, directions sewn in thread. Back at the quarters that night, the midwife steamed herbs for the children who couldn't stop coughing. Mint and pine and bitter bark that smelled sharp and medicinal. The girl sat close, watching, learning. Patrols are tighter after 1850, the midwife said quietly, stirring the pot. New laws, new risks. A pass can save you or kill you depending on who's checking it. The girl nodded. She'd seen passes, seen stamps and seals, and the way a piece of paper could mean freedom or a whipping depending on the color of wax. You remember that, child, the midwife added. Laws change, roads close, but knowledge stays. Steam curled upward, thick and white, like a message written in air that no one could hold. Comfort turned to urgency in the girl's chest. The world was tightening. Patrols, passes, forged seals. Time was running short. The next day, the jailer doubled the guard posts. The public reading day, when jail accounts were reviewed in front of witnesses, was moved earlier to satisfy creditors who were getting impatient. The overseer stood in the corridor and shouted his threats. Any Bible tricks, any clever games, I'll burn every quilt and book in this jail. You hear me? Everyone heard. The girl was sent to clean the office again. The jailer was inside, practicing his speech about the miracle locks, trying to spin the story in a way that didn't make him look incompetent. Unexplained incidents. Enhanced security. Full investigation. Double quote. She listened, memorized every word, every pause, every inflection that revealed what he feared most. Threat hardened her resolve. She'd been afraid before, but fear with a purpose was different. Fear with a plan was fuel. That night, the hymn returned in the corridor, slower, steadier. She hummed it while scrubbing stone, and the prisoners followed her, breathing without being asked. The clock showed 11:05, 11:06, 11:07. The locks clicked open again. Every one, same sequence, same minute. The girl kept humming, kept moving her rag in circles, and stored the jailer's practiced words in her memory like seeds for planting. The girl was sent to the doctor's office 3 days later with a message about medicine for the owner's agent's nerves. The doctor's back room smelled like camphor and dried herbs, and glass jars lined the shelves with Latin labels she couldn't fully read. But she recognized patterns, the way letters repeated, the way our X appeared at the top and tinked in the middle. Language wasn't a wall, it was a tool, something that could be learned, same as hymn verses or key rhythms. The doctor prepared a brown bottle and told her, 2 drops in water before bed, no more. She nodded and pocketed the bitter bark he gave her for the coughing children. As she left, she took the Latin phrase with her, not the words themselves, but the shape of them, the pattern. Language became a tool, not a wall. And tools could be used. A new patroller captain arrived in the district, and everything got harder. He was a man who enjoyed his authority, who demanded passes for every errand and checked them with cold precision. The girl watched him one afternoon when she carried water past the courthouse steps. A clerk stamped documents at a public table, pressing a seal into melted wax. The wax was bright red, official, clean, not like the dark, wrong-colored seal she'd seen in the jail ledger. Her eyes tracked the patroller's thumb as it hovered over the stamped paper, checking for flaws, looking for reasons to make trouble. Danger sharpened around her like a blade, but proof was multiplying. The wrong wax wasn't a single mistake, it was a pattern. A system of forgery that ran through passes and ledgers and official documents that weren't official at all. The patroller's thumb hovered, and the girl kept walking, head down, storing what she'd seen. That evening, the preacher met her and the stable hand in a back lane behind the church. The sky was dimming, and the air smelled like rain coming. He sang him verses soft, testing, waiting to see if they understood. When the river runs high and the fog rolls, double quotes, the girl hummed the next line. Look for the pole that points to safe crossing, the stable hand joy, his voice rough but certain. Don't cross when the pole is down. The preacher's face tightened with something like relief. You're hearing it, the hymn maps doors and crossings. One verse warns of a wrong ferry, another tells you which houses have safe cellars, guidance clarified risk. The network wasn't just about opening locks. It was about knowing which roads led to safety and which led to patrols with dogs and chains. The preacher reached into his coat and pulled out a thin ribbon marked with a wax impression. Dark red, almost brown. Someone's forging passes, he said quietly, using a seal that don't match the courthouse. If you've seen this color, you've seen the proof. He pressed the ribbon into the girl's palm. She closed her fingers around it and felt the faint texture of wax against her skin. Hide it, he said. And when the time comes when we've got witnesses, you show it. Thunder muttered in the distance, low and warning. The overseer searched the quarters 2 nights later. Looking for evidence of conspiracy, he tore through trunks and threw quilts into the yard, his torch flaring in the darkness. Any tricks, he shouted. Any hiding, I burn it all. The girl had already moved the ribbon, hidden it inside her bracelet, not a strip of cloth tied at her wrist that looked like nothing important. The overseer's torch came close to the quilt trunk. Too close, the girl's breath caught, but she didn't move, didn't flinch. He kicked the trunk can, moved on, frustrated, looking for something obvious he could use as proof. Fear was contained by composure. The torch flared, then passed on. When he left, the quarters exhaled as one. Then the owner's agent collapsed, fever, chills. His body shaking so hard the bed frame rattled. The midwife was called. The girl went with her, carrying water and holding the lamp steady. They steamed herbs and tried to slow his racing heart, but he was too panicked, gasping for air, his eyes rolling back. The girl started humming, the lullaby tempo, slow and steady as a resting heartbeat. The man's eyes found hers. She kept the rhythm even, guiding his breathing with the sound. In, out, in, out. His shaking eased, his breath steadied. Between breaths, he whispered, the margin. Don't let it burn. Mercy opened a mouth long closed. The girl nodded, and the man fell into exhausted sleep. At dawn, while the household scrambled, the girl slipped into the agent's room. On the table beside his bed sat a Bible, worn and soft with age. She opened it to Exodus and found cramped writing in the margin. Names, dates, a manumission clause tied to seal color and clerk's oath. Shall be released from bondage, provided this clause bears the seal of the circuit clerk, bright red. Official stamp. No deviation permitted. Shock became purpose. The forged seal wasn't just about passes, it was about burying promises. Erasing freedom before it could be claimed. She closed the Bible, and the page edged at her finger like a warning. The clerk who could verify the seal went missing, out of town, people said. The letters were slow, and the patroller captain blocked travel without proper passes. The preacher came to the quarters after dark. We bring the proof to the courthouse steps on public reading day. In front of witnesses, secrecy yielded to daylight risk. The plan shifted from hiding to confronting. Outside, thunder muttered beyond the city, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The storm hit hard, roads flooded, the bridge supports groaned under the current's weight. In the chaos, the girl used lantern signals the preacher had taught her. Tilt left, danger. Hold steady, wait. Lower 3 times, safe to move. She stood at the jail yard's edge. A guard scrambled. The stable hand watched from his cell window. 2 other prisoners, men named in the Bible clause, pressed close to the bars. She tilted the lantern left. Patroller on that road. She held it steady. Wait. She lowered it once, twice, 3 times. The locks clicked. The men moved, quiet, fast. They reached the church basement and hid in the crawl space among trunks and quilts. Terror became teamwork. and the storm covered their tracks. The lantern dipped one last time, and the girl slipped back through the rain to the quarters the storm made at the bridge all night. By morning, the patrol captain had moved his men to higher ground and sent dogs along the main road. But he'd forgotten the old ferry landing. The preacher came at dusk. Tonight, the ferry's running if the pole shows. They moved through back lanes after dark. The girl, the preacher, the stable hand, the 2 freed prisoners, and a borrowed mule that followed the girl's hand like it understood the stakes. The preacher sang softly, "When the river runs high and the fog rolls, ... double quotes." The girl hummed the next line. They walked in rhythm, following the hymn's directions, turning where the verses said to turn. At one point, the stable hand started toward an easier path. The girl caught his arm and hummed the wrong crossing verse, the warning about routes that looked safe but led to patrols. He nodded and followed her lead. Minutes later, they heard dogs on the road they'd avoid, heard men's voices calling. Near failure flipped to saved motion because she'd corrected the route in time. Lightning cracked the sky, and for one heartbeat the ferry pole stood visible at the landing, tall, straight, pointing toward safe passage. "There," the preacher said. "We cross now." The boatman waited in the fog. An older man with weathered hands and a face that asked no questions, he helped them into the boat. The mule balked at the water's edge, but the girl laid a hand on its neck and hummed low. The mule's ears flicked forward, and it stepped carefully into the boat. The fog thickened, the current pulled hard. But then the fog cleared just enough for the boatman to see the pole on the far bank and guide them across. The river became mercy. What had been a barrier became a corridor. Lantern light trembled on black water like a second moon, and they reached the far side safely. They couldn't run far. Charleston patrols worked both sides of the river, and the lost shadow stretched long. They hid in a smokehouse loft, waiting out the daylight while riders passed below. Dogs sniffed at the base of the building, then moved on, fooled by smoke and peppered rags. Endurance replaced haste. The girl sat with her back to the wall, the Bible wrapped in quilt cloth on her lap, and waited. Hooves faded, dust settled. At nightfall, they moved again, through back lanes toward the courthouse district, keeping to shadows. A patroller stopped them at a corner. "Tass," the girl spoke softly. She named the seal color dark red, almost brown. Named the ribbon mark pressed into wax that didn't match the courthouse's own. The patroller's face flickered, his fingers loosened on the reins. Authority wavered under truth. When a child named secrets calmly, power had nowhere to hide. "Go," he said finally. "Before I change my mind." They walked past him, slow and steady, and the mule exhaled white in the cold night air. They reached the clerk's office before dawn. A light showed in the back window. The preacher knocked, once, twice. The door opened a crack. The missing clerk stood there pale, exhausted, eyes red. "What do you want?" "We want you to do what's right," the preacher said. Inside, the office was chaos. Papers scattered, a satchel half-packed. The girl laid the Bible on the desk and opened it to the margin clause. She placed the ribbon beside it. The clerk stared at the dark wax impression, then at his own official seal on the desk, bright red, clean, sharp. "It's not the same," the girl said quietly. "Someone forged your seal." The clerk's face crumbled. "They threatened my family. I tried to run, but running don't fix it," the preacher said. "Only standing douse." The clerk lifted his seal stamp with shaking hands. "We do it in daylight," he said, "where everyone can see." Fear broke into duty, and the night began to lift toward morning. Morning of the public reading day came cold and bright. The courthouse steps filled early with townspeople, creditors, guards, and the curious. The jailer arrived carrying an open shackle like proof of conspiracy. The overseer stood nearby, arms crossed, face hard. At the top of the steps, the clerk appeared with a wooden box. He set it on the public table and opened it. Inside were 2 wax seals. He held them up, one in each hand. "This one is official, circuit clerk stamp. Bright red." He raised the other. "This one is not, dark red, almost brown. A forgery." The crowd leaned forward. Murmurs rose. "Someone has been forging documents," the clerk said, "using this false seal to conduct illegal business, including the burial of manumission clauses." The overseer's face went dark. "That's a serious claim. It's a provable fact." The clerk gestured to the girl. "Come forward." She walked through the crowd, bare feet silent on stone. The stable hand and preacher followed. She pulled the ribbon from her bracelet knot and handed it to the clerk. He held it to the light. The wax impression matched the forged seal, not the official one. This ribbon was found in the jail office, he said. The wax color proves the forgery. The girl spoke clearly. I seen both, the official seal at the courthouse. The wrong one in the jail ledger. They don't match. Bring the ledger, someone called. The request echoed through the crowd. The jail ledger was brought heavy, leather-bound, reluctant. The clerk opened it on the table where everyone could see. He flipped through pages, his finger tracing entries. Here, double debt sales, under wrong seal. He turned more pages. Here, transfers south. Same forged wax, entry after entry, pattern after pattern. The owner's agent stood, his face gray. I was told those were proper documents. By who? The clerk demanded. Silence. Then the girl spoke. The Bible clause says people should be free, when debts paid or the owner dies. But someone used the wrong seal to bury it. The preacher handed the Bible forward. Exodus margin. Read it. The clerk read aloud. ... shall be released from bondage, provided this clause bears the seal of the circuit clerk. Bright red. Official stamp. No deviation permitted. He looked up. The clause requires the official seal. Any other seal votes the claim. The crowd erupted in whispers. The creditors calculated. The owner's agent realized the fraud voided his authority. The clerk pulled out fresh paper and his official seal. He wrote quickly certification that the Bible clause was valid, that the named persons were entitled to freedom. He pressed the authentic seal into bright red wax. The imprint bloomed like a flower, clean, sharp, undeniable. The preacher spoke a blessing, not vengeance, just justice claimed with reverence. Let the record show that truth was told in daylight. Within the hour, witnesses filled the jail corridor. The clerk's order was read aloud. Shackles were unlocked in view, not as rumor. As law made honest, the girl stood watching as the stable hand walked free. As the two prisoners stepped into daylight, as chains fell away, she hummed the hymn one final time. Voices joined rough, steady, grateful. Tapers were ribboned and signed. A new charter was spoken. Arrangements made for relocation to safer ground. The overseer was questioned. The jailer suspended. The forged seal confiscated. And through it all, the girl stood quiet, her bracelet not empty now, the ribbon in the evidence box, the Bible marked with a court notation, verified and enforceable. On the courthouse steps, in the afternoon sun, the open shackles were set down gently. Not thrown, not discarded, set down like tools no one would use again. The girl stood beside the preacher, the stable hand at her side. The light was warm now, golden, forgiving. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The ledger was closed and properly sealed, the papers signed and ribboned. The hymn quiet but still there hummed in her throat, like a promise kept. Somewhere, a church bell rang the hour, clear, steady, marking time the way she'd marked it in the corridor with patience, with purpose, with the certainty that patterns could be learned and truth could stand. The stable hand smiled at her, tired but real. You did it. She shook her head. We did it. The preacher's hand rested on her shoulder. You saw what needed seeing. That's how everything begins. They walked down the steps together, past the open shackles, past the dispersing crowd, past guards with no orders left to give. And on the courthouse steps, in slanting afternoon light, the shackles lay still silent, empty, and finally at rest.